Hey guys, it's Cam from Craft and Tailored, and in this episode of What Is On My Wrist, we're talking about a Breitling SuperOcean reference 2005. The nickname for this watch is Minute Creeper, and it's actually a dive watch. So Breitling, as you know, is a company that is been known to produce aviation-based chronographs in their main lineup, but Breitling actually did produce dive watches, and they still do to this day. So this is a very rare and interesting example, but definitely worthy of some time on the wrist. I'm really excited to have this here in the shop, and I don't think anybody's ever done a video on a Minute Creeper. The name Minute Creeper is cool, and this watch is just super awesome. As you know, the mid to late 1960s for dive watches and tool watches in general was kind of that golden era of time. So we see a lot of icons come out of this era in time, and a lot of what we would consider icons within a reference range. Obviously, watches like the Submariner and the Speedmaster and even like the Breitling Navitimer existed prior to the middle of the 1960s, but I think we see a refinement in the design of these watches in this era, and this is a good example of that. So this specific example is from 1965. Again, Breitling, as you know, is a watch company that is better known for its aviation-based chronographs and not really its dive watches. Breitling in 1965, actually, so this is a first execution of the example, wanted to build a reliable diving chronograph. And what's interesting about this watch is if you kind of just look at it, you wouldn't think that the watch is actually a chronograph, because there isn't a sweep seconds hand, there isn't a chronograph hand, so to speak. There's no subdials. It looks kind of almost like your stereotypical dive watch. There's a rotating outer bezel, it's oversized, but yet you do have these pushers on the side of the case, and it's a very legible watch. So it's kind of an odd duck, if that makes sense. So again, you don't really see the stereotypical chronograph subdials and hands, but this is for sure a chronograph through and through, and one of the most interesting watches to, in my opinion, ever have come from Breitling as a brand. I really like what Breitling is doing with some of the heritage lines with like some of the chronographs and the dive watches. I think they're looking at their past similar to other brands like Tudor, whereas and even Omega to some extent, where other brands like Rolex and Audemars Piguet and etc., they're really kind of pushing the boundaries of their design and not looking at their past. So the nickname Minute Creeper, or more commonly known as a slow counter chronograph, is in direct reference to the reference 2005's unusual form of operating. The chronograph hand actually is recording elapsed time by slowly moving on the outer dial. So if you look at the watch, you have kind of this black inner, I don't want to really call it a subdial, but it's kind of an inner dial, and then you have this outer white, almost panda-esque minute recorder subdial, I guess, if you want to call it that. But the chronograph hand actually slowly creeps across the dial. It's a slow counting chronograph. So, normally in a normal, like let's say Daytona, or even in like a Breitling Navitimer, what you'll have is this chronograph hand that ultimately ticks and sweeps across the dial, and as it's running in its minutes, it'll record the elapsed time. But this actually slowly creeps across the dial. It doesn't tick, it slowly creeps across the dial. Furthermore, Breitling modified a high-grade Venus caliber 188 manual winding chronograph movement. So this Venus Cal 188 is a movement that you would see in other more stereotypical chronographs. So it's a highly modified version of an existing manually wound chronograph movement. So it's not an automatic, like let's say like a sub or something like that. It is through and through a chronograph, even to the point where there is a manually wound Venus caliber 188 in this. Breitling also added another really unique feature. And so we are always about the tiniest, minute little details in terms of vintage watches. But what is interesting is they basically have this thing that is called a function indicator, which is really rad. So at the, right above the 6 o'clock marker, we have this like little circular cutout in the dial. And underneath that cutout is a luminous plate. And what that plate does is when you are operating the start, stop, and reset function on the chronograph, it actually tells you what mode the chronograph is in. And the reason why they had that is because if you were operating this watch as a diver or for its technical use, you wouldn't be able to tell what operation the chronograph is in. Furthermore, there's no ticking, there's no sweep seconds hand. The minute counter actually slowly creeps along the dial. So in order to actually decipher what mode the watch was in, they created this little function indicator above the 6 o'clock position or the 6 o'clock marker on the dial to basically indicate what mode of operation the chronograph is currently in. So when the chronograph is not running at all, the dot basically at the 6 o'clock position is just black. It's just a black little like cutout on the dial. When you start the chronograph, there's actually a luminous filled portion on that plate that it lights up. Obviously not now because the tritium luminous material here is past its expiration, right? It still hits under ultraviolet and all that kind of stuff, but essentially there's this luminous filled portion, so the little circle or the dot at the bottom becomes basically like white or luminous filled in this position. And then when you hit the pause, basically, there's a small dot at the 6 o'clock position. It's a 42 millimeter watch. It's very similar to, let's say, like a Breitling Navitimer. I don't think that it feels oversized on the wrist. The lugs are very long. The lug width is 22 millimeters, so a lot of strappage here, if that's a word. You can hashtag that, David, strappage. But you know, it's a technical watch for technical application. This was meant to be worn over a wetsuit or a dry suit, similar in fashion to like a Breitling Navitimer that would be worn over a flight suit or something like that. So kind of a robust watch. It's not overly thick, which is kind of nice. On wrist, it's really nice. It kind of wears nice, especially for a larger watch. And I think that the larger and I wouldn't say larger, but the longer, the elongated lugs actually help this watch wear nicely. If a watch is really big and it has short, stubby lugs, typically that watch to me tends to wear larger and kind of look a little bit larger to me personally. And also, I don't really like watches that have a wider case but shorter lugs. It just kind of looks weird. So there's a nice balance here. The thing that's really interesting too is that you again have kind of this, I guess, multi-layered dial. You have a base plate in the dial, which is obviously kind of more this stereotypical, I want to almost say like Submariner-esque type of dial format. You have a triangle at the 12 o'clock position and then dashes at the 3, 6, and the 9 position with that function indicator in the right above the 6 o'clock position. This outer white, I guess you could call it like a subdial, but it's really more of like a plate that sits on the top portion of that dial. Really gives a watch some dimension and it's very visible. The other thing is that the hands are very broad. I guess you could call it the minute counter hand, has like this big diamond luminous filled tip. So at a glance, you know how much time has elapsed when you are operating the chronograph. So I think that from a visibility perspective, this watch has a lot, just kind of a lot of unique features that make this thing very eye-catching and kind of unique as a reference in itself. The minute and the hour hand have some differentiation, and they're also almost kind of like, I would say, Benris-esque, or maybe like a TR, or almost like military issue Blancpain kind of design, in the sense that they're, you know, they kind of have like that broken up loom type of in them, where there's like 2 positions for the loom to be applied. It's not fully loomed, which I think from a design and also technical perspective allowed Breitling and allowed these other watchmakers to get a lot of loom on the watch, because if you had this big open hand, I think the loom would either fall out or you couldn't loom that hand. So that's why there's basically like a dash, and there's like these two like lume plots within the hand, if that makes sense. Outer rotating bezel as well, luminous filled pearl at the 12 o'clock position in your stereotypical dive watch kind of, you know, fashion. And outside of that, that's kind of it. This example is very early. The reference was released in 1965, and this is a 1965. So one could say that this is a Mark I version of the watch. I've seen unsigned crowns, and I've also seen signed crowns. This one is very early and does not possess a signed crown. I've seen 2 or 3 others that also do not have a signed crown, but the shape of the crown is actually very Breitling-esque, and I've seen the same crown in earlier examples. So I think this could have been a very, very early example, being that it's from 1965, and the reference was introduced in 1965. So kind of an interesting thing that I've seen when learning about and understanding the reference ranges as a whole. The overall condition of this watch is really, really nice. I would say that the watch is unpolished. We've got a really nice, thick, sharp case. Really nice patina to the luminous material. Has kind of like a warm kind of golden feel to it, and the outer white dial has taken on kind of like a creamy color. So really nice watch. It's really nice on wrist. It's kind of eye-catching, I guess you could say, and is panda-esque. So in any case, yeah, cool example. I will provide a link in the description below and maybe up here so that you guys can check this out and, you know, learn more about it and all that good stuff. So as always, guys, thanks for tuning in. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. If you've got watch questions, we are here to help. Drop us a line at info@craftandtailor.com. Also, be sure to follow us on Instagram if you're not doing so already for the latest updates and content from us here at Craft and Tailored. Thanks for tuning in, guys. I'll see you in the next one.